kia ora koutou. Welcome to this day, another reflection from one of our St. George's community on these astonishing proclamations by Jesus Christ we call the Beatitudes. And it's with great pleasure today we have with us Liz Fairgray. Liz is married with 2 grown-up children and is a speech and language therapist. So Liz, welcome.
Thanks, Josh, and thanks for giving me a chance to talk a little bit about the Beatitudes.
Yeah, I'm always looking forward to. I have no idea what people are going to say, so looking forward to this. So the first question we're giving to everybody, Liz, is what is it about the Beatitudes that intrigue, inspire, make you feel a little uncomfortable, perhaps, can confuse you, and challenge you?
Okay. Challenges. Okay, I'd like to start a little bit with what inspires you.
Yeah.
Because, and I'm really thankful to have this chance, because the Beatitudes have kind of been part of my life and inspiration for as long as I can remember. And my mum used to say, I was brought up on the Beatitudes and we're going to bring you up in the Beatitudes too. And I used to think, well, what are these things? So I think sometimes to people who've never heard the Beatitudes, they can seem a bit odd to unfamiliar listeners, because they seem to present ideas which are contradictory to each other. They're a bit of a paradox, and they seem like 2 odd things to put together. It's like everything, though, that Jesus says, he says, I am the king, but I'm also a servant. When you're first, you're also last. So I think that the inspiration I get from the Beatitudes is that they fit with everything else Jesus has said.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like maybe those words he said on the Mount were a self-portrait of who he lived his life to be. And maybe he's painting a picture of who he wants us to be here on earth too. Saying, I was here on earth and I lived these paradoxes, and you're on earth now, and these are the same paradoxes I want you to live. So I guess the inspiration for me is that God, as Jesus, actually lived those paradoxes. God just wasn't somewhere up in the sky or some creature, some being that didn't relate to the earthly life, but because God came as Jesus, it was related to earthly life. And so that's probably why the Beatitudes really inspire me.
I think that's a great point, Liz, because many scholars make the point that first and foremost, the Beatitudes reveal to us the character of God. And of course, Jesus is the exact representation of God's being. You know, he's the image of the invisible God. So I totally go with that. That's what inspires me, that I see Jesus revealing the character of God, and that's what Jesus lives out in his own ministry and his own life, and his death on the cross, of course. But that's for Good Friday. Any other things on that, Liz?
Well, yes, that inspires me. So if I had to choose my favourite Beatitude, I think it's a bit difficult to do, but it's the Beatitude I want to sort of talk about and explore a bit. It's the Beatitude that probably doesn't first come to mind for most people, but it speaks powerfully for me. And it's the Beatitude, blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Now, I've got no experience mourning the loss of a husband or children. All mine are happily well. But despite that, I have actually mourned the loss of quite a number of loved people. And my Christian journey actually started with mourning and with loss. And at the age of 15, within the space of 18 months, I lost my closest friend at school with cancer. My next door neighbour baby, aged 6 months. And then oddly, our curate at a family church died just at a week old. So for me at 15, I was confronted with huge loss and mourning. And then obviously the question, well, what on earth is God all about? Is this what it's all about? All these people dying.
Yeah.
And yet I more recently have read Eugene Peterson saying you're blessed when you feel that you've lost all that is most dear for you, because it's then that God, who is the most dear to you, can actually embrace you. So I think I had to start grappling with that from a really young age. I was rudely confronted with that reality, and I had to either totally reject God at that point, I think, or actually see how that beatitude could make sense for me, that in loss and in mourning, there was comfort. An extra loss that I probably didn't appreciate at the time was that I lost the typical teenage years that are carefree and fun, because I had all of that happening in a way that probably wasn't terribly typical for a teenager.
Yeah.
I probably didn't appreciate that too much later, but even though I understood that later, I can still return to Jesus' words, "Blessed are you who mourn, because you shall be comforted."
Yeah.
And this also tells me that Jesus really recognizes we do mourn. Jesus is actually saying it's okay to mourn. We're not just going to pretend it was nice that they died. We're not going to pretend it's nice that they had this illness. We're not going to say, oh, well, really, their physical life is irrelevant. It's just, they're coming up to heaven. Don't worry about it. He's actually acknowledging mourning is a real thing.
Yeah.
And despite that mourning, there will be some comfort that God brings us.
Yeah.
He offers us that spirit of comfort. I guess we might call that the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
And then that, I guess, for me, sometimes that Holy Spirit experience was somewhat transcendent, but sometimes that comfort came from children. And one I remember in particular, in addition to the 3 people I've mentioned, my nephew, aged 4 months, died on the day that my other nephew turned 4 years of age. And when I saw him for his birthday, I said, oh, happy birthday. This is your wonderful birthday. You're turning 4. He said, yes, I'm happy. It's my happy birthday, but I'm sad too. And I said, oh, why? And he said, well, I'm sad because my other cousin, he's died today. But he said, you know what? That's good too, because he can breathe the air in heaven all by himself, and he doesn't have to breathe with those tubes anymore. And that was an enormous comfort.
Yeah.
And it's so extraordinary that a child who was just turning 4 years of age had that extraordinary insight into actually, yes, I'm sad, but so I guess that's what that beatitude brings to me. It's a yes, there's a problem, and there is some comfort in that as well. And I think I've been blessed by being comforted. And I think, well, if God has blessed me with the comfort of other people, of joy, what do I do when I see others who are in mourning? And I think that my professional work is constantly filled with people who are in mourning. And although my work is not a nurse or a doctor confronted with death a lot, I am very much confronted by parents who are in mourning because they've lost the child they expected to have.
Yeah.
And I believe that I'm quite often required to bring that ministry of comfort to others. And just before Christmas this year, I had a mum phone me. She said, sobbing, she phoned me at work and said, I'm actually in the cleaner's cupboard at work because I've just heard that my child has got this chromosome syndrome and I don't know what to do. What are we going to do? Can you help? Are we going to be able to fix this? And I can't necessarily fix it, But as she sat in the cleaner's cupboard at work, I thought, this is just such a state of mourning and loss for her, that it's not at all the life she expected. And she's sad because she's not going to have this little girl who's going to come up and chat to her and love and say, I love you, and all the things that we expect a child to do as part of our natural interaction.
Yeah.
So I have to offer her some comfort and some hope as well.
I think that's that's a great phrase to finish on, Liz. The ministry of comfort, for all of us, really. How can we be the ministry of comfort? And as a church, particularly encouraging and comforting each other as we all move forward, really. Thanks, Liz. Thanks so much for your reflection.
You're welcome.
I really appreciate it. Thank you very much indeed.
Hope it's valuable for some of you.
Yeah, it's really good to have the opportunity to hear from people within our community. And we'll be asking people on the YouTube sort of thing below to tell us what are your thoughts on these two big questions. The two questions: what do the Beatitudes, how do they inspire, intrigue you? And also, is there a particular beatitude for such a time as this? So we'd love to hear all of your comments. So please put them in the YouTube below. What are your thoughts on those big questions around the Beatitudes? Thanks, Liz.
Welcome.
You have a wonderful day, whatever you've got planned, and God bless.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Bye.
Kia ora. Bye, Liz.
Bye-bye.